All right, thanks, Michelle. Hi, everyone. For those who I think I've met pretty much everyone at this point, my name's Andy Scott, and really what I'm going to try to talk to you the most about now is the grading, the pay for performance grading for 2020 and for 2021. I know that we've got a lot of questions of what does all this COVID stuff mean for us for our grading for 2020 in particular. So we spent a good amount of time in the coordinating center trying to think through what was fair, what made sense. Blue Cross has been really accommodating and giving us the leeway to say, what do you guys think makes sense? How do you think that we can do this in a fair way that doesn't off top line, the guidance from Blue Cross is don't punish people for COVID, but in any way that's possible, try to keep some focus on the actual QI work when it's appropriate and when it works. So that's kind of the context of what we looked at. And so I'll start with 2020. So that's our current year, remembering that the time frame for that starts November 1st of 2019 through October 31st of 2020. So we're 2/3 to 3/4 of the way through this time period at the moment. So first thing, for participation for the COVID period, which we're defining as March 1st through June 30th. So, the start date, a week or two before all the lockdowns started here in Michigan, and up through the June 30th date where Blue Cross kind of gave the guidance that all abstractors and all work should be back on the CQI work. So we kind of defined those 4 months as our COVID period. So nothing will be graded for participation during that COVID period. So no penalties for late abstraction, no penalties for late data transfers. We didn't have, obviously as Keith talked about, we didn't have the March collaborative meeting. I think we did have an executive committee meeting and some, clinical champion stuff. We did not, certainly, and Carrie's obviously been really engaged with the abstractors through this whole time. We did not take formal attendance for any sort of grading or penalties or points for that period. And then for the sites that were kind of in progress of onboarding, part of the points for a new site would be, hiring an abstractor or initiating your data transfer within the first 90 days after your participation agreement is signed. Essentially, when March 1st came, those clocks stopped, and then they restarted on July 1st. So really felt like from a participation standpoint, it wasn't realistic to expect that really to hold anyone to those standards during those 4 months. So none of that will be considered for the 2020 P4P. For the performance was harder. So we kind of had to figure out how do we take this, kind of diverse state of Michigan with, a very uneven hit from COVID in, Southeast Michigan got hit with much harder cases or many more cases. Whereas the whole state was really prepared for that, and it didn't end up happening everywhere. So trying to figure out, how do you account for that? And then, some of the clinical questions we got were, if we're ordering more CTs, chest CTs, or chest X-rays around suspected diagnosis of COVID, does that mess with the numbers? So we really, we tried to run all the numbers with, for the whole year and then without that time period, and found that the effect of either one of those two kind of methodologies was really uneven, and it was really hard to say which one was better. Some were better for some sites, some were better for others. So and a lot of that was, probably all of that was really realistically out of the control of the sites themselves. So what we settled on was that essentially we're going to, when the year comes to an end, when we have your data through October, which is the end of the 2020 P4P year, we'll calculate, for every quality measure that you're working on, we'll calculate 2 scores. The first one will be as if none of this ever happened. We'll take all the data you have for 2020, November 1st, 2019 through October 31st, 2020, see where you fall in regards to the targets. The second thing we'll do is take the 8 months that were, knock on wood that we don't go back into any kind of high level COVID time, but between now and November. But we'll take the 8 months that were not part of that, the 4-month COVID period, and calculate your score without those 4 months. So the one thing we will try to do, which is still a little bit of a work in progress, is to look back at the actual targets that we set, specifically with some of the conditions that might have some seasonality, to figure out if the targets themselves need to change a little bit. We want to really make sure that we're doing an apples to apples comparison. So it's important to relook at those targets. So bottom line, we will take these two scores, one score as if none of this happened, one score without this 4-month COVID period, measure them all, and then you'll get your best score from the two. So this is not something you need to actively choose. You don't have to say we want this or that. We just have to, we will do that for you and feed that information back to you. So we are hoping or aiming, maybe more accurately, to have a little bit of a, we haven't been sending the regular monthly report, so we're hoping to have a monthly report sent out to you in early September that will show where you stand with each of these two grading systems. So this is labor intensive. This is not, we'll have to site by site go through and do this. So it's not something we can just click a button and have these numbers. So we will try to run those scores and get that information to you as quickly as possible. So. The broad take-homes, I guess, for the 2020 P4P grading: 1, participation, don't worry about it, March through June. We are really happy that a lot of you were able to keep with it, but I know that several abstracts were redeployed. Clinicians obviously had their focus in other areas. So, participation, don't worry about during those times. And for the actual performance, we're going to calculate 2 scores, one with the COVID time and one without, and you'll get your best score for the 2 of those. So that's kind of the take home for the 2020 P4P grading. I'm going to go kind of through the 2021 proposal now really quick. This is something that still needs to be approved by Blue Cross. We had a great discussion with our executive committee this morning to kind of hone in on some of these things. So for 2021, we put together the proposal that we'll be sending over to Blue Cross. So the first thing to look at for year 1 sites. So these are sites that sign their participation agreements and start working this calendar, in 2021. So a lot of these sites may not even be on, but the main thing that a new site will have to do in year 1, this wasn't in the 2020, but I just want to kind of highlight, is that you need to, besides signing all your agreements, getting your data transferred, getting your abstractor hired, is to start planning for the actual QI work in your year 2. So at the end of the year, we'll be asking for a intervention template to start your QI planning. So this, like I said, this was in the 2020 P4P. So sites that are new in 2020, like Michelle mentioned earlier, St. Mary's and Livonia, the 3 new Henry Ford sites, you'll be looking at the end of this year to submit your intervention planning for the QI work for 2021. For year 2 sites, now these will all apply to year 2 and to year 3. So year 2 and year 3 sites are going to be working on site-specific safe discharge goals. So our 2 pediatric centers, Children's Hospital of Michigan in Detroit and DeVos over in Grand Rapids, will be working on safe discharge for asthma, and all of our other hospitals will be working on safe discharge for low-risk chest pain. And then those are site-specific goals where you'll be working towards a target. And we do have, since these are kind of the continuation of the path or the alternatives to hospitalization models that we've had in the past. And there's kind of 2 levels to getting these points. One is doing the actual work, doing the narrative reports and implementing some sort of countermeasure, and then the actual performance of whether you increase or actually do better or meet the targets. The other things that we have for year 2 and year 3, there will be collaborative wide measures for head injury for adults and for pediatrics. So, this is something you'll probably hear more over the next year, but, we're kind of, especially with complications from the COVID with chest x-ray and PE, really just want to think about 2021 as an, like I said, we'll say this over and over, an all in for head injury year. So, we've been working on these head injury initiatives for a couple of years here in Medic. Have made nice progress, but really are hoping that the next step will be to kind of push those all the way up so we can really achieve the goals that we're looking for there, and then that we will be able to move on to the next things. So there'll be collaborative wide measures for adult and pediatric head injury for the year 2 and year 3 sites. So the other change that is coming into effect for years 2 and year 3 is that this will affect the abstractors, and I think Carrie talked about this a little bit this morning, is that we've traditionally given either 5 or 10 points, depending on what year you're in, for the data accuracy of the abstraction. So that's previously just been a percentage of the all the data elements that you abstract and giving you a score on that. As Carrie's kind of dove into it a little bit, what she's seeing is that we really want to make sure that we're focusing on making sure the cases are in the right cohorts. So we've split out those points, and so now that whether it's 5 or 10, 40% of those points will be based on getting the cases in the right cohorts, and then the other 60% will be based on the actual data element accuracy, similarly to how April did it in the past and how Carrie has done it this year. Okay, so for year 3, so essentially everything that I talked about for year 1 and year 2 also applies to year 3, the 3 and above. So this is the majority of our sites, to be honest. So again, we have the all-in for head injury, collaborative-wide goals, and site-specific goals for the year 3+ sites. So the way that we generally set these targets, and we'll get the actual numbers out to you, will be that the collaborative-wide goal will be a little bit of a lower goal that everyone will work to together in kind of a team sport type way, and then the site-specific targets will be set a little more of a stretch to get each site to push themselves up to the higher performance. Then the other things that we're doing, so this is a little bit of a change, and we'll send out email communication about this too. But the whole idea, there was concern that, like I've talked about before, that the PE and chest X-ray work was potentially compromised by COVID and some of the diagnostic decisions that the clinicians are making. So we are moving both those measures into a temporary maintenance period for 2021. So we will still are planning to produce. We've sent out the PE materials, we've mailed that and given it to you digitally to help support your QI work in the hospital, and we will really not take our eyes off of that and continue to work to help you guys work on that. But the grading will be a little relaxed for 2021 as we kind of fully understand the impact of COVID on this. So everyone will need to maintain within 10% of the previous targets for PE and chest X-ray. And then finally, CT overuse for kids is a measure that medics have been working on, I think, since the start of, since we started working and grading on quality initiatives. And it's one that we've done really well on. The performance from the collaborative has been really good. We have several sites whose overuse numbers are, in the low single-digit percentages, doing really well on this. So this is a measure that we are kind of in its end of life cycle type phase, where we expect that everyone will maintain to the performance target set for 2020, with the idea that if we kind of feel like this work has become routine, well, routine's maybe not the right word, but this has become kind of established practice within the sites, and this is where everyone is comfortable being, and it's a reliable and maintained measure, then that measure will kind of transition off of our P4P in our focus for the years to come. So a lot there. I think that we've fielded a lot of questions around the 2020 specifically, like how are things going to affect, how is the COVID and the redeployment of abstractors going to affect the 2020 grading. So hopefully kind of laid that out there, and I want to now open it up for questions and see if we have any. Megan is shaking. No questions? Okay. Maybe I'll give another 10 seconds. Anyone feel, again, we are, I know that this, and feel free to email as well. I know that that was probably quick, and we'll send this material out afterwards, but we want to make sure everyone really feels comfortable understanding how the grading will work for 2021. Okay, so with that,